This is supposed to be, what's the big idea with IP and navigating common intellectual property challenges. A lot of times those types of discussions start with, well, let's talk about a patent. Let's talk about novelty and non-obviousness, getting into the kind of the weeds of all of that stuff. And I'm not sure that's always helpful, for what people need and, what people are looking for at this stage. And I kind of like to take a bigger picture approach to all of that stuff and, think about it a little more globally and how IP can help your business and can help you, get to where you're trying to go and what role IP can play in that. And I want to, first of all, I also want to say, if you guys have questions while this is going on, please feel free to put them into the chat. I should see them there, and it won't distract me or throw me off. I don't want to say this is a free-flowing discussion, but we're not tied directly to any slides or anything like that. So please speak up if you do have questions. I said we're not going to get into the weeds of IP, but I do want to at least give a brief overview of the different kind of IP that we work with, that we think about when we think about what's going to be helpful for our business. Everybody knows about patents, right? Patents are kind of the big thing, the big bully in the room when you're talking about IP. And patents protect ideas, and that's why they're so powerful. But we also have trademarks, which protect our brands. We have copyrights, which protect the expression of our ideas, right? So we have our ideas, but we put them down on paper, we write them in code, we record them as music, and those are protectable, in that sort of form. Another big one that we have that gets a little less shine is trade secrets. Trade secrets are really important. If you think about things that are important to your business, things like your contact lists, your pricing models, your marketing plans. If you're Coca-Cola, your formulations, things that you don't necessarily want to pursue a patent on, or you may not be able to get a patent on, but also, are important to the core of what you're doing and who you are and how you differentiate yourself from others. And so a lot of times I like to think of IP and sort of this world of IP and this, these different resources that we have at our fingertips. I kind of think about it as a galaxy, right? So if you've got a galaxy with different solar systems within that galaxy, and if you'll kind of stick with me here as I go through this, but if you think of just as an example as Microsoft as being the galaxy, right? And then you've got these different solar systems within that. It might be Windows, and it might be Word, and it might be Excel. And if we zoom back out to the Galaxy version, to Microsoft, well, that's trademarked, right? You trademark Microsoft, the brand, and you probably have copyrights within sort of the Microsoft galaxy of, well, we've got marketing plans, we've got marketing materials that deal directly with the bigger picture of Microsoft. Trade secrets, probably, what are we going to do in terms of marketing? What are we going to do in terms of going after competitors, all of that stuff? Do we have patents sort of at the galaxy level? Probably not. We probably don't need them at that level. But if we zoom in on one of our solar systems, let's say we zoom in on Windows, right? Okay, we got another trademark there. We've got probably copyrights in the source code and the things that, get down to that level. They may register them, they may not. They're oh, thank you. Sorry about that. You have copyrights in and of themselves become copywritten at the moment they're committed to a medium, so you don't have to register them. Does Microsoft Windows have patents? Probably so. And they probably have trade secrets as well. And you can think of that the same way for the Microsoft Word solar system and the Microsoft Excel solar system. And so, when we start thinking about these things, we have to think about how they all play together, how they all fit within our business, and how we can make them work for us. So we have a question from and please bear with me if I mispronounce names, but I think it's Rejoice Jones. What would be your advice or referrals for bootstrapped companies that need legal IP support? It's a good question. And it goes into why, this discussion about what's important to you and how you make IP work for you kind of starts with what's the vision for your business. Early on, you're going to have, as a founder, you're going to have a million different things flying at you. You're trying to get a business off the ground. You're trying to figure out if you should hire people. Should you get office space? What do we do for HR? There's a million things that I think founders deal with that never occurred to them when they had this kernel of an idea for a business. But one of those things is IP. And if we've got limited resources that we're starting with, how do we make those resources go the farthest? If we think back to our sort of solar system and galaxy example and kind of picture it that way, and we start to think about, well, what are the most important things? Patents are great. Patents are also very expensive. People ask me all the time, well, what's it cost? What's it cost to get a patent? What's it cost to get a patent? I always tell people, be prepared, have in the back of your mind that you could spend $40,000 over the course of 3 to 5 years to obtain a patent. So it's not that you stroke a check right off the bat for $40,000. That cost is spread out, but it's also a long game. And patents may not be as core to your business as you think they are. If you're in a pharmaceutical space, maybe that's right. But if you're in a product space, if your business is built around an app, it could be that, a patent is really not where you want to spend your money. And so the advice that I always give is look at what your competitors are doing. Be honest about who your competitors are and use publicly available resources to the extent you can to figure out what they're doing. And of course, you can talk to an attorney. There's plenty of attorneys that are available, through different startup spaces throughout Atlanta. I mean, there's plenty of resources in Atlanta, but people that can answer questions. If you know what you're looking for, it's pretty quick to figure out what competitors are doing. So, are they trademarking their brands? Well, that's pretty easy to do. Go to their website. Are they using sort of trademark nomenclature when they advertise themselves? Do they have a little TM next to their name? Well, if that's the case, they might have a pending trademark application, or they might just be saying, hey, everybody, we consider this to be our brand name. If they have a little circle R next to their name, then okay, well, they do have a registration for this mark, so they spent some money there. A lot of times, if they have a product, they're going to mark that product with their patents, with their patent numbers, or it'll say, patents pending. And then at least a little bit about what they're doing. You may not know everything about what they're doing, but it starts to give you a sense. Let's say you go to the USPTO website, that's the US Patent and Trademark Office. You go to their website, you do a little searching, poking around, and you figure out, holy cow, this company that I consider to be my competitor, that I consider to be, who I'm on par with, or who I will be directly competing against, they've got 50 patents to their name. And Rusty told me that, we're talking 40K a pop. And sorry, it's Monday morning, but I think that's about $2 million that they've spent on their patent portfolio. And if that's the case, I need to think really hard about, one, am I going to be able to get a patent for something that directly competes with these folks who already have 50 patents? And two, am I getting into the right space, right? They've spent $2 million, they just got that sitting and waiting there. They might just be itching to put that $2 million to work, and start asserting those against me. So I think that's also important. That's not about getting your own IP. It's about that's just business intelligence and trying to find out what other folks are doing. So I think those are all important things to consider, as you're going through this. The, to this same question, are there resources available? Are there pro bono resources available? There are. There's Georgia Lawyers for the Arts, but that's for artists. It's not necessarily for startups. But there are plenty of law firms in Atlanta that offer packages to early stage companies, right? I mean, everybody, when I do office hours at some of the startups around town, people are like, well, I know, but you're a Troutman Pepper. I can't ever afford you. And my answer to that always is, look, I wouldn't be here spending my time doing office hours if I didn't also think there was a way that, financially speaking, I could make this work for you. So I think lawyers who work in this space are willing to work with you and come up with creative solutions to kind of help you with whatever it is that your needs are at this stage, because it's important that you get it right early on. There are a lot of things that will be much more expensive for you to fix on the back end. And if we can help you get set up on the front end and set things up where you can pay for that over time, or that you figure it out over time, then that's going to make you successful long term. And that's the goal, is not just how do we squeeze some money out of startup companies, it's how do we help them be successful so we can have long-term partnerships with them and see them get to these big grand exits that they want, or these great successes that they want. So we got another question from Ingmar. Do you think that having IP makes you more valuable as a startup, and what are the cost benefits? I think this is a good question, and we work on our end a lot of times doing M&A, right? So we're representing companies that are buying up startups, and so you think about, like, what are the things that a company that might acquire you are looking at, and IP is going to be part of that. And so I do think it's important, and I do think it makes you valuable, and I think it's just as valuable that you have a story to tell about why you do or don't have certain IP, right? So let's say someone comes in, they're doing diligence on you, they think you got a great product, and they say, well, I see, you don't have any patents here. You don't want the answer to be, oh yeah, well, it was just too expensive for us. We just didn't want to do it. You want the answer to be, yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. It's something that we looked into. We looked at what our competitors were doing. We considered what our product is and what the life cycle is of our product versus how long it takes to get a patent. And ultimately we concluded that in our space, we didn't need a patent, right? We were working on something that was a combination of lots of well-known things that we were putting together in a new way, but we were doing it so much better than everyone else. And we had, an early start in the market. We had that leader advantage, and we just didn't see, it was going to take too long for patents to actually get to us for us to be able to do anything valuable with them. So I think when you're thinking about where you want to spend your money, and is IP going to be valuable for us, those are the questions you need to be thinking about in a sophisticated way, and be able to answer questions in a sophisticated way. Is it smart to file a trademark to, sort of protect who you are and protect your brand? Absolutely, I think it is, because it's sort of a low-cost thing, and it's a box that you can check. And it's easy when those people come in and start doing diligence. It's like, yeah, we registered our trademark. We felt it was important to protect our brand. Did we get patents? Well, we filed a provisional patent application because we wanted to be patent pending. But ultimately, we decided that wasn't a good way for us to spend money, going forward. We wanted to invest in our R&D and development, or whatever it is. So I think, yes, IP makes you valuable as a startup, but you have to think about why. It's not just a box you check where you say, yes, we've got IP now, that's valuable for us. It has to be some why to it, and being smart about how you spend that money. And so we've got another question from Laura Mitchell. Any thoughts on spending money on trademarking? So I think, surprisingly, I just answered that in the same way. Yes, I do think it makes sense. I wouldn't go crazy with trademarking. I think you want to try to get your word mark and not worry so much about logos or stylistic marks and all of those things. Early on, start small. If your company name is Nike, then you want to trademark Nike, just the word, and then you'll go, further overall. Let's see. Does establishing your brand online initially suffice? I think it does. I think it's a good you get your name out there and you start doing those things. And the good thing about trademarks is you can always go back to your data first use. And so when you file the application, you're going to be able to say, look, we've been using this name in commerce for, since the beginning of 2019. We didn't file our application until today, but here's evidence of how long we've been using it. I still think if you've got the resources and if you're figuring out, okay, my IP spend is going to be this, I at least want to file my trademark application. I think that's a smart thing to do. I don't know that you need to start going globally and doing this sort of crazy trademark branding spend. But I think if you can do it in the U.S., I think you should. But definitely, if you get it online, start using it and start making a name for yourself, I think that's great as well. Let's see here. We don't have any questions right now. If you guys do, please speak up. But one other thing I want to talk about that goes along with IP, right? So we're thinking through our strategy. We're thinking about what IP is valuable to us and how we should spend our money. We also need to think about how we make sure that we have the rights in the IP that we think belongs to us, right? And so how do we do that? Because it doesn't always, the US system is not set up in a way that always makes crystal clear sense. And so when it comes to patents, rights in patentable technology rest in the inventor. And it still rests in the inventor, even if that inventor is your employee. It doesn't automatically become property of the company just because the employer invented it in his or her role as an employee. So let that sink in just for a little bit. But the key to that is you want to have agreements in place that make these things clear. And so a big part of my job is not only patents, which is how I started off my career and what I did for a long time, but as my career evolved, I started working a lot more on technology agreements. And so assignments and employment contracts. Now, we've got labor and employment attorneys at our firm, but I consult with them all the time about, are these the right IP provisions that we should have in our agreements? So you want your employees to have the right types of agreements. If you're a founder and you've created an LLC, just because that relationship exists doesn't mean that what you created as a founder necessarily got assigned to the LLC. So that's more paperwork that you want to have in place when someone comes in and starts doing diligence and looking at the company. I was the founder, so of course the company owns my IP. It doesn't actually always work that way. What if you hire outside developers and consultants? You want to make sure that what they create on your behalf belongs to you. And so that's a tricky space too, because look, we're developers. We start with some of our own IP. And so we're not going to give you that, but we'll give you what we develop on your behalf. And so we have to think about, okay, well, is that enough for us? Did we get all the right stuff in that relationship? And then maybe you're not buying technology. Maybe you're not having something developed for you, but you're going to license existing technology, right? I mean, we work with Georgia Tech's right around the corner from where I am now. A lot of startups spin out of Georgia Tech and need to get IP that was developed at Georgia Tech. Well, how do they do that? That's through licensing. And so we need to make sure the license looks right. So again, all of this stuff kind of fits together and plays together in what your overall thoughts should be when it comes to IP. It is much more than, should I file a patent? So we got some questions. One was, can you file a trademark on your own without legal services? And that, yes, absolutely you can. It's uspto.gov. That usually works out okay. The hard part is when you run into a problem and then you start trying to fix it. That's when you need an attorney. And otherwise you can just be spinning your wheels where it's something an attorney could fix really easily for you. And so while I think that's an attractive thing to try to do on your own, you might find yourself running into more problems than you would have for something that is more or less a fairly low cost thing to go after early on. Again, it's always easy for me to say it's not my money that I'm spending, but I think trying to fix it after the fact will be more expensive for you. So someone else, Rose Scott, asked us a good question. And I think I kind of touched on this, but if you hire freelance contractors to build a product, how do you ensure, that they don't try to claim ownership? And that's exactly that question. It's you just want to make sure that the agreements are in place. There's going to be a development contract, do stuff on a handshake, make sure that the terms are in place, and make sure that, you've got the proper assignments early on. That stuff's hard. It's helpful to have an attorney to, go over those agreements with you and make sure that the proper things are in place. But I think it's important that you do. And then let's see, we've got another question from Ingmar. What's the process in acquiring IP or licensing? And how do you determine value and fees? That's a tough one. It is really just a, excuse me, it's just about supply and demand. There is no, there's no real book that you look to and say, okay, this is this kind of patent, so I should license it for this much. It's a tough thing. You can have, attorneys that have worked on similar licensing deals and can tell you, is this kind of market for what they've seen? But it's really just about, it's a back and forth, it's a negotiation. And like all negotiations, I think, both sides should feel like they won a little bit and like they lost a little bit. And that's always going to be the case. But in terms of how do you go about it, sometimes you can, if you see a patent that you think you want to license, you could reach out or have someone reach out on your behalf. I always feel like if you're reaching out, that's going to put the patent owner in a position of strength where they're going to think, oh, good. Oh, finally, I'm going to be able to get some money out of this. So I'm not sure, that it's always the best strategy. If you have a situation where, I think the best thing to do is just talk it over, with an advisor at whatever startup space you're working at, colleagues that have worked in similar spaces, or, attorneys that have office hours and things of that nature. Steven Rodriguez had a question. Are there any issues or roadblocks that startup owners should keep in mind when shifting from LLC to C Corp for IP transfer? Not really. I mean, those are pretty basic assignments. If it is an LLC and if the LLC is going to wind down and become a C Corp, you really just want to make sure that there's paperwork in place that, you just want a paper trail as much as anything to say, hey, yeah, we thought about this. When we changed from an LLC to a C Corp, we made sure that all of the IP flowed from one to the other. And ideally, you'll record those transactions with the Copyright Office or the USPTO, which is just sort of notice to everyone else who comes along looking that was done and it was thought about. But as long as as long as you kind of got that paperwork in place that shows that paper trail and that you were thinking about it, there's no real issues or roadblocks to speak of. And Rose Scott had another question for us. When is a company's data considered intellectual property? For example, Yelp complained other companies had stolen their content. It also relates to data scraping. Can data obtained via web scraping be considered the website owner's intellectual property? That's a tough one. And that's one that I would encourage you to really think through, what you're doing there. I'm always a little bit leery when it comes to data scraping and, making too big of a show that that's what my intellectual property is, because I think it's not legal questions that it raises. I feel like it raises sort of ethical-ish questions, right? I mean, you put people, you're presenting this as this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. And I always feel like if I'm the one that's listening, I'm thinking, so you're just kind of aggregating people's data and calling it your own. I like to think through how we characterize that scenario in terms of how that's valuable to our company, and should I be, leaning more on what I do with that information once I get it, right? I run it through my algorithms. I change it. I make it useful in some way. That's just the starting point for what I do. That's not the data that I own just because I scraped it. Now, when I ran it through my models, when I did things with it, and what came out the other end, that's what's important and valuable, and that's what I own. And I always try to think about it like that. And then, what are current best practices around valuing intellectual property? That's a tough one as well, because again, I always think about when I was younger and I collected baseball cards, and there's a monthly magazine that came out that told me, how much the cards were worth, and that made things nice and easy. And it's just not the case, with IP, and especially for early stage companies, because your value is really your business. Your value is really what you can show, that you're doing with your IP, as opposed to the IP itself. And so that's what makes it a tricky question, a tricky conversation. I think it's always helpful to have those conversations, but I don't think there's any easy way to do it, because I think it's hard to just figure out what the market is just by having some conversations. It goes back to, what I always, not to bring up politics, but what I tell my mom when it comes to politics, anecdotes aren't data, right? And if you're having conversations with other founders and what worked for them, those are helpful, and it's helpful to kind of give you some idea of what's going on, but it's also not data. It's just anecdotes. And so I think it's important to have broader conversations with experts.
Rusty, we've got about a minute left.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. This has gone so fast, and thank y'all for all the questions. I hope this has been helpful. If you have more questions, please reach out to me. I'm always available to chat, and you can always email me. It's rusty.close@troutman.com, and hopefully that info is in your sign-up information. But I've really appreciated talking to you guys and having a chance to talk about IP and strategies. And I really encourage you to reach out if you need anything further. And I hope you guys get a lot out of the rest of the conference. I was happy to be able to kick things off for you, but I hope it's a good day or a couple of days for you.